Hey guys, so today I am back with another 10-minute history video from History Matters. This video is going to be talking about the the Weimar Republic and Nazi Germany, so probably detailing, the rise of Chancellor Hitler and um the effects that, led to the Nazis kind of becoming, the the dominant force in Germany. I apologize for the weakness of my voice. I kind of strained it. So if I'm talking very low or slow or I sound a bit off, I apologize. But yeah, I'm remembering back then we definitely talked like back in school about we touched upon this subject, but this was like a long time ago for me, like over like almost 10 years ago. And we usually like jump right to Hitler and World War II and all that and the atrocities that the Nazis started committing. That's kind of like the main, I guess, meat of it, like when the Nazis had already taken over and everything that they were doing. But obviously after World War One, Germany was in a really bad position. Like the treaty, that and the conditions that were imposed on Germany specifically were very brutal. Having to lower their army, the amount of reparations they had to pay, like again, like the conditions, the peace that was established after World War One. I think someone had remarked that um it's not really meant to last and it's going to lead to further conflict, something like that. And it is really, I think, accurate because obviously, like I said, Germany after World War One was in such a bad position that it did give rise to, the charismatic Hitler and all the promises he was making, and to make things better for Germany, right? And all that. So I'm really looking forward to kind of reestablishing what exactly are the conditions that led to this, to the rise of the Nazis, and how the Weimar Republic just didn't last. So either way, yeah. If you want to watch the original video by his Sorry. So if you want to watch the original video by History Matters, the link to this video is down in the description down below. It is the first link you'll see. And if you enjoy my content, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. It would really help my very small but humble channel grow, and I'd appreciate it very much. Now, with that said, and now without any further ado, let's get to it, shall we? Let us watch 10-minute history, the Weimar Republic and Nazi Germany.
1918 and the First World War is finally over. As punishment for losing, Germany's two wartime allies, the Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman empires, were carved up shortly afterwards. The pressures of defeat plunged Germany into chaos, and as a result the Kaiser abdicated. Revolution and counter-revolution were the order of the day, and in the small town of Weimar, Berlin was too dangerous, the Weimar Republic was declared. The next year the Allies signed the Treaty of Versailles, which dictated the terms of Allied victory. This territory was lost and the Rhineland was occupied by the Allies. Germany further had to reduce its military mass.
Yes, this is what I remember a lot about having to limit themselves. No tanks, no submarines, no airplanes. Very brutal. Especially by the armies everyone was mustering at this time, 100,000 just is so small, because again, that's kind of the big thing, especially like around this era, is that armies had grown super massive. Like to put in the perspective, right? Like Napoleon at his time could mustered 600,000 men, just to invade, Russia, and that was at the time the largest army the world had seen. And now, at this point, like almost 100 years later, like way more. Like the casualties alone for this war speak for themselves. So again, this is like in to put that into perspective, so small, it basically might as well have told them they can't have an army at this rate, you know? Dang. Like I said, the conditions imposed upon Germany really sowed the seeds for World War, II, I think. They were very brutal. And again, all losers in war have to make concessions. It's a given. It's a thing that's always been around in war. But sometimes some like things like this goes to show, like I said, I really do think the Treaty of Versailles set up Hitler's rise and World War II. And again, I don't know what more lenient conditions could have been imposed, but I do think this played a big part in what happened later. So yeah, that's just like my opinion, though.
Pay war reparations and also had to accept almost full responsibility, had to reduce its military massively, pay war
Holy crap, yeah, again, like, look at this. That's insane.
reparations and also had to accept almost full responsibility for the war's outbreak. So this new Weimar Republic was one of the...
And that's the funniest thing. This all started because, some Serbian people, the Black Hand, shot Franz Ferdinand. This began with, Serbia and the Austrian-Hungarian Empire beefing, essentially. And, Germany, like many others in that time, there was so many alliances, interconnected alliances, that basically promised, hey, if you get in trouble, we're gonna jump in. And Germany was like one of those things. Like a lot of people in World War I got involved like that, all those treaties and stuff. So, and they got all the blame, Then again, like Austria-Hungary, the empire doesn't exist anymore, nor does the Ottomans. Germany's, I guess, the last man standing of that group. But like, yeah, it was kind of like a bit like, to put all the blame on Germany as if they started it, I think definitely was a bit unfair there,
most democratic nations in the world at that point. Suffrage was granted to everyone over the age of 20, including women. The German people could vote on two aspects of the national government. Every 7 years they voted on a president who presided over the German parliament, the Reichstag. Every 4 years people would vote for political parties in national elections for the Reichstag via a system known as proportional representation, whereby the percentage of votes nationally dictated the percentage of seats in the Reichstag. The president could call elections whenever he felt and also had the important job of appointing the chancellor who ran the government and could propose laws. These laws had to be passed by a majority vote in the Reichstag, and since no party ever got 50% of the seats, that meant the parties would have to cooperate. No, democracy did not guarantee harmony, and there was numerous attempts at revolution, such as the quickly aborted Socialist Republic of Bavaria and the 1920 revolution led by Dr. Wolfgang Kapp. Kapp seized Berlin, and the German army refused to attack him because there was a strong belief that Germany had only lost the war due to political betrayal. Kapp's revolution was only ended by a general strike which ground the country to a halt. This turmoil did not help the German economy, and eventually Germany missed a war payment. The French wished to punish the Germans for this, whereas the British wanted leniency. The French government decided that if the Germans would not pay them, then they'd simply take the money instead, and in 1923 the French occupied the heavily industrialised region of the Ruhr. The reason for this was that German reparations could be paid in raw materials, many of which were produced there. Another way that German reparations could be paid was in foreign currencies, which were paid for by printing more paper marks. This created the hyperinflation that the Weimar Republic is famous for. For example, in January 1923, a loaf of bread cost 163 marks, and in early November in 1923, the same loaf of bread cost over 75 billion marks. In November 1920...
My god, like I said, brutal, dude. Like, yeah, you could see this wasn't gonna last, This is so unstable, untenable, and just, again, like, overwhelming for sure, you know what I mean? So I don't know, but definitely, like, I don't know.
Another attempted revolution occurred in Munich, led by a certain Adolf Hitler and undertaken by the SA, the military.
I think Hitler at one point was actually imprisoned when he was trying to stir up some things in his earlier career, and I think it was in prison that he wrote Mein Kampf, right? I could be wrong about all that, but I could have sworn that's how it went, or at least what I had heard. That he had been jailed in his earlier career, and I think he was trying to emulate Benito Mussolini, in his takeover of Italy, and it ended up with him going to jail. And yeah, Mein Kampf. I think it's supposed to mean my struggle, right? So that there is that.
The arm of the National Socialist German Workers' Party, better known as the Nazi Party. This revolution failed when other nationalist politicians refused to help Hitler and the army was called in. Hitler was wounded and arrested shortly afterwards. It was in prison that Hitler dictated his autobiography, Mein Kampf, which...
Okay, I got that right. I didn't hear about the wounded part. I heard about jail, but holy crap. And Hitler was a World War I veteran. And that's the thing. There's a lot of bitterness, obviously, in Germany post World War One. And there are many we did cover the war, and there are many factors as to why Germany lost. But there was a lot of blame going around. First the Kaiser, and then next the Jews, and then there's a lot of blame going around as to why things did not go as smoothly as they should, and obviously surrendering was seen as a betrayal. And he mentioned earlier they felt like politics had stabbed them in the back in the war. And again, I do know like Hitler was a World War One veteran, and he was actually distinguished for his bravery. And I think there are several famous examples. One I can think of is that he was actually held at gunpoint by like a British soldier, I believe, and the soldier spared Hitler, or at least that's like a story. Boy, did that soldier make a mistake, sparing Hitler. That sucks. I wonder if he ever like realized what he had done in the future. But and if that may have affected him. Another one is that he actually was a victim, I think, of like mustard gas. Like he actually got like got put in the infirmary because he got hit by gas, and it had affected him. And some people have speculated that apparently that may have messed up his mental faculties or whatever. Kind of like a King Henry kind of thing, is like, oh, the jousting incident messed up his mind, and then that escalated his violence. I don't know. But yeah, that's a lot of things. And again, Hitler's among the disgruntled veterans, blaming a lot of factors as to why Germany had failed.
Became the bedrock of Nazi ideology. All of this would make it seem like the Weimar Republic was about to immediately collapse, but it managed to survive thanks to the intervention of two specific individuals: Gustav Stresemann, who helped to repair relations with France, and Charles Dawes, an American who would later become vice president, who helped to relieve some of Germany's economic problems. Germany's repayments were lowered, the French agreed to leave the Ruhr, and America agreed to loan Germany money, which created a strong economic link between the two countries. So then the Great Depression struck, tanking the US economy and dragging Germany's down with it. Paul von Hindenburg, the president of Germany...
Talk about bad luck, dude. Like I said, like, such a really... The freaking 20s were just, like, quite the era, man.
At the time, failed to get the Reichstag to agree on a response, or anything. As a result, he had to invoke Article 48, which allowed the president to pass laws without the...
Oh wow, pass laws? In order to help fix the economy, Hindenburg brought economic matters under the umbrella of emergency regulations so that he could bypass the Reichstag.
Approval of the Reichstag in times of emergency. The biggest problem with Article 48 was that there was no definition of an emergency, meaning it was open to abuse. The German people turned to different political...
A loophole. Yeah, what constitutes an emergency, eh?
Parties to fix the problems. Some chose communism, whereas others placed their faith in the National Socialists. The Nazis believed that the German-speaking people...
Yes, so Nazi aims, unify the German-speaking peoples, make Germany self-sustaining, eradicate the threat of communism, expand Germany by seizing neighboring lands for Germans to expand to, assert the superiority of the Aryan people, answer the Jewish question by removing the Jewish people from Germany. Yeah, honestly, just like I said, I have no scruples about talking about how the Nazis are like the worst humans, the worst group to ever exist. Like what they wanted to do and what they got away with is horrifying, especially considering that it happened not even a full 100 years ago. It is so close to our time. And like when we're looking at the past and history, all these videos, when we see atrocities from like thousands of years ago, it's one thing, like, oh, that was back then, we're more civilized now. And then you look at this and see, like, oh no, humanity is still capable of very awful things. And again, it's just awful that this happened and that humanity allowed something this awful to just happen. All these guys and all the millions that they murdered, that they deemed inferior. Like, who are you to decide who's inferior just because they happen to belong to a certain ethnicity or a certain religion or a group? Like, you're not better, just because you have a different, you follow this religion or you have these physical features or whatever. Like, you're not. And it's just disgusting, dude. The Nazis are disgusting people, and honestly, they're all in hell. Like, they are all in hell burning, as they should, because yeah, I'm sorry. It's an awful thing. It really is. It's just I'm kind of sad that we kind of allowed it to happen. Like I said, we see a lot of bad things happen. We cover a lot of history on this channel. Well, we only cover history on this channel. And like again, when we're looking at things at the past, it's easier to kind of distance ourselves because like, well, that happened 2000 years ago. The world wasn't as civilized. We have advanced since then, and then it's like I can't fully hide behind that logic now because of this. It's like, no, dude, we can still do bad things, you know? Humanity is still capable of doing very awful things. And it's sad to just think about it, that there are people who just deem others inferior and don't care. Like, they can see another person and not even identify them as a person, like devalue them, like like you're stepping on like an ant or something. It's like awful. The the indifference of evil, it's again, I'm just disgusted that this even happened, and it's like disappointing. Like I said, I'm not against humanity. I love our species, and I think a lot of us are capable of good. There are a lot of good people in the world, and but unfortunately, you can't deny that there are bad, awful humans, and it's just sad that like they could just gain that much power and implement such awful things, that they even got that far as a failure from so many people who did nothing, who, you know, thank God they were stopped though, but they still got away with way too much. Again, like I think they're all in hell. I usually don't like um think like I leave it up in the air. That's for God to decide, but I think these guys are in hell. I think if anyone made it for sure without a doubt to hell, it is these people.
should be united in a single state. They argued that communists and the Jews were the enemies of the German people and as such had to be removed. The Nazis were popular because they wished to disregard the Treaty of Versailles, which many Germans considered insulting. They also wished to limit any foreign involvement in German affairs by limiting the rights and numbers of foreigners in Germany. Another reason was people's anger with the continuing economic crises which they were desperate to end. A series of elections led to a massive increase in the number of seats held by the Nazis, and by 1932 they were the largest party by far. After continuously coming first, Hitler asked President Hindenburg to be made Chancellor, which he refused several times because they were worried that Hitler would overthrow the government. It's eventually, after the Nazis' continuous victories in elections.
Yeah. And that's the thing, like Hitler playing on like the people's disgruntlement. Like, hey, this treaty sucks. I would get rid of it. Like, you know, like Hitler, if you look at his speeches, he's very overly passionate. It's almost like he's not like, you know, kind of mellow, like, oh, let me give you a speech. Like, he's like, there's a lot of passion in the way he gives his speeches that you can't help but be sort of like pay attention. And I've seen some speeches from Hitler, and if there's any one quality he had that I cannot deny, it is the fact that he was a good orator. He could deliver a speech. He could get people to listen. And he used that great gift of speech, and his words were so ugly and disgusting and evil, and he used it to do awful things. Like, what a waste of, like, a human, you know?
Hindenburg agreed to give him the job in January 1930.
You know, on a much lighter note, you know, they think, you know, I had heard that George Lucas, the creator of Star Wars, was actually incredibly inspired by the rise of Hitler to create Chancellor Palpatine. Like, you know, obviously Palpatine becoming Chancellor, seizing power and all that. And that, you know, the clone troopers, well, they were originally clone troopers, but later known as stormtroopers, which is what, you know, Nazi, I think, officers or soldiers were known as. So there's a lot of inspiration from history that played into Star Wars. And, yeah. Definitely you do see that. So, that's really interesting, I always thought.
1933. So Hitler immediately began working to overthrow the government. A fire started in the Reichstag by a young Dutch communist was used by Hitler to paint all communists as the enemies of Germany. Hindenburg, under pressure from Hitler, issued the Reichstag fire decree, and the Reichstag passed the Enabling Act, which suspended many civil liberties.
Okay, so he abolished freedom of expression, freedom of the press, right to privacy, right to protest. Laws didn't have to abide by the Weimar Constitution. The government did not need the approval of the Reichstag to pass laws.
And made Hitler the de facto dictator of Germany. These were passed mainly because the opposing communist parties were outlawed and that the vote was being held in a building filled with armed members of the SA.
Oh my
Over the
gosh.
next few months, Hitler established the secret police, the Gestapo, in order to help shore up his position. He outlawed trade unions as they were seen as breeding grounds for communists, and in July he abolished all other political parties. In 1934, Hitler ordered the SS, another paramilitary group, and the Gestapo to eliminate his enemies, which included the head of the SA, Ernst Röhm, in an event known as the Night of the Long Knives. This was mainly because Hitler felt that the SA was the only force that could stop him. Shortly after this purge, President Hindenburg died, and Hitler assumed the role of president as well as that of the Chancellor. He declared himself the Führer of Germany, and using Article 48, create a single-party dictatorship. The lives of Germans changed massively under the new Nazi regime. The media was brought under the control of Joseph Goebbels, the Minister for Propaganda. Heinrich Himmler was placed in command of the Gestapo and the SS.
You know what's a really good film? There's a musical actually called Cabaret. It's interesting because it takes place and like, it's a musical, like kind of in the cabaret style. You know, that like Berlin was kind of known for back in the olden days. And then like the movie kind of has the slow growing as you see the Nazi force actually grow in the background until the very end, where they become basically prominent. And it kind of does show the indifference of certain people towards the Nazis' rise until it was too late. So I'd recommend it. Check it out. Like it's a really good musical. Like, I actually got into it like a while ago, and it just I got reminded of it right now, you know.
who were ordered to crack down on anyone who disagreed with the Nazi government. Germans, for the most part, accepted having less freedoms in return for a higher standard of living, and because the Nazis had ended the chaos from the decade before they took power. The Nazi government established the German Labour Front, which was like a trade union except without the representation. The Nazis also established the Strength Through Joy program, which was designed to keep workers happy. It even helped to reduce class barriers by making vacations, clubs, cinemas, and
Also, yeah, Hitler, he he was the master of propaganda. Like, Nazi propaganda is one of the most effective propaganda forces machines in history. You know, with the films, the images, they were definitely trying to instill an image, a look. And you think of the flags, the red flags, and the soldiers all dressed up, and then like Hitler's like sort of like brownish tan, I don't know what, like, you know, outfit and whatnot. The the banners, the armbands, like they really had this flair, this visual style that, in combination with the films that they made and the images and just the propaganda, like that was probably one of the most effective propaganda machines in history. What the Nazis did, and again, like the image still sticks today. You could see something and be like, "That's a Nazi thing right there." Like, you know what I mean? Um, I just got reminded back in high school. I think someone showed up to school dressed up in like a Nazi Gestapo uniform. And I remember people kind of being like, back in high school, that was insane. And he wasn't even like Aryan. The dude was like Hispanic, like me. Like it was wild. I remember people talking about it. Um, so yeah, and getting all kinds of memories now.
other recreational activities open to people outside of the upper classes. Its most popular creation was the people's car, better known as the Volkswagen, which further bridged the class divide since it could be paid for in installments. In 1936, Hermann Göring was put in charge of the economy, beginning the four-year plan, which was supposed to make Germany entirely self-sufficient within 4 years. Unemployment virtually disappeared, conscription was instated, and major public works were undertaken, most famously the Autobahn and the Berlin Olympic Games. The most important part of the four-year plan was that it saw the beginning of German rearmament, which was a violation of the Treaty of Versailles. Hitler's plan to unify the German people picked up towards the end of the 30s. In 1938, after some double-dealing, threats, and a referendum, German troops marched into Austria and Hitler announced its annexation. After negotiations with the British and the French, it was agreed that Germany would annex the ethnically German Sudetenland from
Appeasement. Another big thing that gave Hitler, again, also like a big part of why Hitler got away with stuff early on. Again, some people just didn't stop him. Like, he was like, I'm gonna take this, and people were just gonna let him, you know? And that's the thing, like, with the appeasement is the big idea at this point. They just let Hitler get away with this stuff, and like, okay, now you can stop Hitler. We're gonna wag our fingers at you. And obviously, Hitler didn't give a crap about honoring anything. He straight up broke a treaty saying, I think he would stop, and then he just broke it and went on. Like, obviously, he doesn't care about actually negotiating with anyone or upholding his word. Like, he will just willy-nilly break treaties if it suits him. That's not a man you can reason with, you know? But it is weird to think that there's a point where Hitler was taking it, where Hitler could have just stopped, and they probably could have just kept it, which is wild, but, you know, as we know, he kept going until everyone's hands was actually forced to eventually declare war on him, but, you know, again, it was, he got away with way too much before people started stepping in. This is something you needed to nip in the bud right away. Um, but yeah.
from Czechoslovakia. Germany soon afterwards occupied half of it, which wasn't agreed. The Lithuanians then caved into Hitler's demands for this territory. The British and the French, afraid of a new major war in Europe, did nothing to deter Hitler from seizing more and more territory or rearming, which served only to embolden him. An agreement was then made between Germany and the Soviet Union to...
It's like a kid, like, you know, when you're like with a kid and then you can tell when a kid has never been told no in their lives or something, and you just let them get away, and that's like a sign of bad parenting. You have to actually teach them the meaning of no and that they can't have everything. Yeah, I feel like that mindset applies to here. Yeah, that's the thing. I understand that, yeah, there's the fear of, oh, we don't want another war, but at this point, you know, the fact that they were still just kind of letting a dude just kind of dictate and bully them, essentially, just because of their fear of another conflict is another big thing. It's people not stepping in when something's happening. It's like when someone's getting jumped and then you have a crowd of people pull out their phones instead of help people. That's kind of like the process of, even you see it today in smaller scales. Something bad is happening and you'll have people not step in. I guess there's a saying, like, the rise of evil happens when people do nothing. Or something like that. But you get what I'm saying, right? It's people not doing anything that allows bad things and bad people to get away with what they want, you know? Because, like, yeah, when bad people or bullies, you know, kind of just keep going and no one's stopping them, again, they're emboldened. They'll just keep going until something happens. You can see it in smaller scales with just people, like, again, like bullies, for example, or stuff. Like, not doing anything's the worst thing you can do.
Divide Poland, and on September the 1st, 1939, the Germans invaded, and 2 weeks later the Soviets would do the same, beginning the Second World War. France and Britain had an agreement with Poland and declared war on Germany, although Germany would quickly overrun France. In 1941, the Germans invaded the Soviet Union shortly before declaring war on the United States. Two very bad ideas.
Yep.
The Germans were initially very successful, and by 1943, the Third Reich looked like this. The Allies, particularly the British and the United States, began bombing campaigns against German cities, most notably Cologne, Hamburg, and of course, Dresden. These attacks were designed to destroy German factories and infrastructure, as well as frighten the Germans into submission. The German economy didn't change drastically at the beginning of the war, since Germany had already been producing arms for many years. One major difference between Germany and the Allies was that Germany was very reluctant to have women working in the factories, which ultimately lowered the number of available workers and frontline soldiers. In the conquered territories, the Nazis implemented a policy of...
The Nazis did not use forced labor everywhere. In France, hundreds of thousands of men voluntarily went to Germany in order to work in factories there.
Forced labour. In Poland, many women were forced to work farmlands to produce food, whilst men worked in factories. Many Jewish people, alongside anyone else considered undesirable, were used for slave labour to produce weapons, some of which they sabotaged. Throughout Europe, the Jewish populations were rounded up and placed into concentration camps. The original purpose of these camps was not extermination but forced labour, although they all had horrendous mortality rates. Before and throughout the war, the Nazis had attempted to...
Yeah, the horrors of, like, places like Auschwitz. I've never been there. I don't think I want to go there. I had a teacher actually tell me that they went to Auschwitz, and after the tour, they had a photo, and the person taking the photo was like, smile, but she mentioned no one wanted to smile there, so they just, like, a photo of just everyone blank face, which makes sense. like imagine, like, what the you know, no one wants to do that in Auschwitz. But yeah, again, like, there's so much, like, movies and shows. Like I said, World War II, especially here in America, is, I imagine everywhere in the world, but, like, you know, there's so much to talk about, so much it's talked about at school. There are countless movies, especially of the concentration camp, like The Boy with the Striped Pajamas, you know, the Anne Frank, Diary of the Anne Frank movie. There's a book, like, Nightfall, I forgot it. It was a book about, that we read in high school by an author named Eli. Dang it! Why can't I remember at the moment? No, it's just called Night by Eli Wiesel. This is the book we read in high school when we were learning about it, and I remember it's a again, you can definitely find so much about people who survived that, writing about their experiences. Schindler's List, probably the most famous movie about that stuff. It's a topic that's very talked about. It makes sense. It is the last great war. It happened less than 100 years ago, but I really hope that when people are like, talking about this and learning about this, that the whole point is not to forget. There's the saying that those who don't learn history are doomed to repeat it, and this is an event that we all really need to learn, because we can't let something like this happen again. Like, yeah, yeah. So, okay, anti-Semitism was already a very common thing in Europe at this time. It's been around in Europe for quite a lot. Jewish people made an easy target for the Nazis, a scapegoat. There was a widespread belief that the Jewish did not fight in the First World War for Germany. As such, the loss of the war was blamed on them.
Decide on what they would do with the Jewish population of Europe. At first, the Nazis wished to deport them, and in fact some were sent to Palestine. It wasn't until 1942 that the camps began to explicitly exterminate prisoners, or that specialised extermination camps were opened. The best known camps being Auschwitz and Treblinka, where over 1.5 million people were killed between them. Throughout the Holocaust, it is believed that roughly 5.5 million Jews were killed alongside roughly the same amount of Poles and Soviet prisoners. Gypsies, those with mental and physical disabilities, as well as homosexuals, were also exterminated alongside them. Having failed to conquer the Soviet Union, the tide of the war changed against the Nazis, and the Soviets managed to force them all the way back into Germany, liberating many of the concentration camps on the way. At the same time, the United States, United Kingdom and Canada, amongst others, invaded Western Europe, and together they managed to push the Nazis back into Germany as well. Most of the German high command, including Hitler, committed suicide in April 1945, and
yeah, Hitler was a coward at the end. Yeah, I think he was a coward. I don't feel bad about talking bad about Adolf Hitler, you know. But yeah, the guy was a coward, you know.
Germany surrendered in May, thus ending the Third Reich and the Nazi regime. Germany was occupied, and the surviving Nazi leaders were put on trial at Nuremberg, where many were sentenced to death. After its surrender, Germany and Berlin were split into occupied zones, and both began the process of denazification. The Allied occupation zones were soon combined into the Federal Republic of Germany, and the Soviet occupied zones became the German Democratic Republic, known as West and East Germany respectively. They would remain divided until 1990 at the end of the Cold War. Ultimately, the legacy of Nazi Germany is complex. The Nazis, whilst committing unimaginable crimes, managed to reinvigorate Germany and build it into a military powerhouse. The Nazis brought about immense suffering across the European continent, and their actions reduced many countries, including Germany itself, to ruins. The consequences of Nazism are still being examined because, frankly, it's still too soon to know exactly what they are. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and thank you for watching.
Well, that was another great video from History Matters. And again, just it's always good to remember, guys, and so we could prevent something like this from happening again.